Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Larry Bailey here with Mastering Encompass series. I'm with Mortgage Workflow Partners. I'm on YouTube, you name it, I'm there. Most importantly, I'm here to have a conversation with you today. We are going to talk all about how to leverage native functionality in Encompass to truly automate your underwriting conditions, your underwriting department. We're going to go over all kinds of information. And what I expect you to really take away here at the end is to go back into your Encompass and to go back to the technology that you're using to really decide what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your automation, if you are doing that at all. So for those that are just joining, thanks very much for coming. We meet every Tuesday live here in the community in our new Teams platform. Hopefully it's been going well. I know some folks have been having trouble getting the link, but hopefully if you RSVP to the meeting, you get the link, that kind of a thing, and we'll get you in. For those that are listening on replay, thanks very much. We'd love to get you here live. That way, if you have any questions to ask, you can live. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and let people into the meeting here today. So show of hands, if you don't mind, for those that are here already. Show of hands, who is actually using some type of automation technology? And I don't mean the automated conditions, standard conditions. Some type of either third-party tech that you're leveraging automated conditions into your environment, or you are one of the early adopters of enhanced conditions and you've used workflow rules to automate something in your conditions. Anybody here done that yet? You can use the Teams function to raise your virtual hand, or you can throw in chat if you like, if you're doing it. Luba raised her hand, so I'm going to say there's one. and really what I wanted this entire experience to be, Kristen's doing it, that's awesome. The idea here is that you've never truly had the ability until now, really 2 months ago, really, but until now to truly automate your underwriting condition department or your underwriting department relative to their conditions or updating those condition statuses specifically through workflow rules. So before we get there, I want to go ahead and share a screen here. I've done a good job as a host here, and I've prepped for a screen share. And what we've all kind of been used to over the last 20 years, give or take, is the ability to use what are considered automated conditions. Of course, if you use this at all, you know that all this does is present an automated condition set that, although it does take 4 clicks, it's still 4 clicks. It's not truly automated. You still have to rely upon your team members to remember to do this and also not to ignore it. And that's been okay. What's happened as a result of this kind of technology, of course, is the onset of third-party technologies. And these third-party technologies have been fairly solid. Certainly no knock against them. It's just that I think their time is past due, truthfully. And so why do I say that? The reason why I say that you don't need third parties to automate your underwriting department is because you don't. One of the important things to remember about in underwriting is the data, right? And so if you've ever been, show of hands, who's ever been an underwriter? I'm going to show my hand like I was my company's only underwriter because it was my company. But I've held the role of underwriter for others. Jill's done that. And it's fun times, Jill, right? You're always worried about the data. Carrie, obviously Carrie. So for those that have done underwriting and have had to put your name on the dotted line, so to speak, of the transmittal or the approval letter to borrowers and their attorneys, you know how serious it is to make sure you get it right. And you know how important it is to make sure the data is reliable and that your documents in your e-folders are the same that you reviewed the first time when you go back subsequent times, especially for the clear to close. So I want to talk about that today and make sure I shared with you what works, what creates challenges, and what's possible natively. For me, the big thing is always workflow before technology. I'm in the process of actually trademarking that because I think it's that important to really put out there as a mark, because I've been talking about this for years and years. So for you, what I want you to think about from today's conversation is, how does the loan go from no conditions to sold with no conditions? So the no conditions up front is you, of course, where you're conditioning the file. The no conditions from being sold, of course, are post-closing conditions or investor stips, whatever you want to call them. And there's this whole process to making sure that, of course, we're delivering that loan as quickly as possible. We're selling that loan as quickly as possible, because every day means more money that we're not making or that we're losing on warehouse lines or extension fees, things like that. And when it comes to the pre-closing part, as well as the pre-application part even, the idea of knowing what conditions are existing in a file are important. Things like making sure that we can import the AUS conditions is okay. But what I'm talking about is, again, on screen, where we deal with automated enhanced conditions. And the reason why this is important to talk about, and for those of you who've been listening to me for a while now, I've been on the enhanced conditions bandwagon for quite some time. And the reason why is because I'm always looking ahead to making sure that the loan files that are in, the conditions that are in the loan file are there because the data exists to require them. So let me back up a little bit here. Again, show of hands, who's using anything that is in Encompass Partner Connect for data? Now, you might be thinking, well, I use them for services. Yeah, you're using the services for the data. So flood, fraud, VOE, VOA, credit reports, appraisal. Those are all important ones that everybody's got to use, right? Are you using them in EPC is a better question. And if you're not yet, again, as I've been saying for quite some time, you need to get there, not just because it's a deadline for ICE that they're going to deprecate and sunset the SDK, right? We know that. The reason why is because you want the data. So when I get into workflow reviews with companies and I get into leveraging this conversation about automated underwriting, the first thing that I have to find out is, what's the reliability of data? In your underwriting teams, what typically happens today right now is, and I'll use the appraisal as a good example because it's easy. Title is another one that's close second, but the appraisal is the easiest one to pick on. The appraisal gets ordered. We get the appraisal back, right? And it's usually back in a PDF. Now, if you're using a company that has a tight EPC integration, you might get some additional data fields back. And if you're not quite sure if that's happening or what your situation is, if you come over into your services, you can look at the data permissions here. And on the data permissions, you can look, and again, we'll use appraisal, and I'll pick on Rigora. And so these are all the fields that are being written back. So if we go down, you can see these are just some, right? And the idea here is that this information has the capability to be written back into the loan file. Why is this important? No earlier than today, I met with somebody who runs post-closing, and every single file that closes, they need to go to the ULDD screen for both Fannie and Freddie, and they need to enter a plethora of information, including appraisal data. Now, that means that if they're entering that appraisal data, think about this, they're entering the appraisal data in ULDD screen post-closing pre-delivery to the GSEs. The reason why this is important is because that means that the underwriter is not seeing that data in the loan file, which means I don't have the ability to use these fancy workflow rules to automate information conditions into that loan file based upon the data that I see. So this is the web that I'm spinning for you, and with a wheel, whatever visualization you want to use. But this is the story that I'm really giving you here, is how you can automate your underwriting department is by making sure you've got the data, right? So if you go through your workflow, if you're not getting the data into the loan file from the source, that's your focus. That's one of the things I want you to take away from today, is figuring out how to get the data from the source into the loan file. Now, most of you on here are administrators. So again, use the chat if you wouldn't mind, please. What is the business rule that you're going to use to protect the data once the data is in the loan file? What are you going to use? Now, hopefully, let's see if anybody gets this right. I'll give you 10 seconds, see who gets the first one in the chat, and we're going to wait for this. Persona access to fields. Luba wins because Luba always wins. Way to go, Luba. Carrie, thank you for pointing that out. So persona access to fields, right? And so how many times, and be real, how many times do you have a persona access to fields business rule in a field that the underwriters rely upon? It's usually not the case. What we really think about persona access to fields is, when do we not want a person to be able to change the data that we've had problems with? It's a very reactive response. And if you do it differently, kudos to you. But most admins are usually just building out persona access to fields business rules in settings down here. And they're doing this because something happened. The rate is locked, so we want to lock things down. The loan was approved, so we want to lock things down. Well, maybe now the appraisal got returned. So now we want to lock those fields down so that nobody can change the data from the source. Now, if you get in that mindset, hopefully you're kind of getting what I'm throwing down here. If you get in that mindset and you start looking at everything in your loan file as data, whether it's from your VOEs, your VOAs, credit reports, appraisal, fraud, these are the same things that I outlined a moment ago in EPC. Once those services are returned, we know that, right? We can see it in both the field data as well as in the document if that's what they're returning. And we can use those activators to engage our protection of those fields accordingly. So if you've never thought about that, it's because you just never did. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, going back to the appraisal document that I pointed out a moment ago as an easy one to pick on, if you go through your workflow, that appraisal is probably being reviewed at least 3 times, if not 4 times, by different people in your workflow. Some of the common things that people are looking for are if there's any subject to completion. That's a big one. Or what's the property address compared to the rest of the documents? Or what was the value? Or is the purchase price listed? Or how about the sellers? Do the sellers on the appraisal match the contract of sale or purchase agreement, depending on what you call it? And the list goes on and on and on. And so I want you to think about that repetitive behavior from your teams, and how can we make sure we look at the data, compare it to other data that we already have, and evolve in a way that the only time we need somebody to review the appraisal and the title for address is when these data sources don't match. So to take this a little step further, what I want you to think about is when we typically think about comparisons. So I'm a big proponent to comparison forms. I'm in 3 distinct teams. The first team is going to be the underwriter. The second team is going to be secondary, and the third team is going to be closing. And the reason why I advocate for those 3 particular teams is because the files always leave and come back. And we're relying upon those team members to take action appropriately based upon what is consistent in the file for data since the last time they saw the file. And so if you subscribe to that, like if you agree with me on that, then what I want you to start to think about are these data points that the underwriter needs to see and clear, if they need to clear that at all. I mean, think about it. If you have them signing off in the purchase agreement, they're looking at the data in the purchase agreement. This is why some third parties are trying to invest in OCR tech to look at the purchase agreement and pull data off so they can get it into the loan file. For me, I don't need third-party tech to do that. I can make sure that a single person is responsible for that, and based upon that data going into the loan file, it's protected and it's used for conditioning. So think about your workflow, think about how the data is getting into your loan file, and then most importantly, think about how many times you have somebody in your workflow checking that document for that data that's already been verified. The story I tell on this is this was not an Encompass client. This was somebody who uses a different platform. And I did an on-site workflow review and met with the executive ownership of the company afterwards. And he said, "So how are we doing?" I said, "You're doing great." I said, "You've got 4 different people checking the same document repetitively." And they were like, "BS." And I'm like, "No, for real." And they were like, "Prove it." And I showed them the review notes, and I showed them the thing that was being reviewed 4 times. Guess what? Was the appraisal. Second place was the title report. Third place was homeowners insurance, right? And so why do I bring this up? And when it comes to automating underwriting, Luba said something really important. Luba said it's paranoia of things changing. Actually, it's the paranoia of being fired. So I know that's probably what you meant, right? Things changing and then somebody gets in trouble. Candace says check the checker times 3. And the attitude here is, I don't know if the information that went in there is correct. So I'm going to do my best to protect the company. So the intentions are well formed. But the reality is it should be unnecessary if the data is valid from the source and it's protected. So how does all this matter? If you're using standard conditions, right? If your conditions in here, what can you do about automating your underwriting team today? The best thing you can do is using the automated conditions business rule here on screen. And as a reminder, all this does is present your team the ability to have an automated condition list. So if I were to go into this particular loan file, I'll just pick a new file, and we'll go FHA because that's what the rule is set for. So if we go in, if you've never done this, that's why I'm showing you what this looks like, because this is what exists today if you're using standard conditions, which truthfully most companies are. So if we go into this particular loan file, we've got, the one status is that we've got FHA. And so if we come down here, we got FHA. So we come over to the E folder. Oh, this is enhanced conditions. That's not going to work. I'm so bad. Sorry, guys, to put you through that. Let me see if I can get you an old file that's got out here. So Chris says, I get it. Services go down frequently and glitches happen within the system. To Luba's comment, I feel like trust in the technology. I feel like also trust in the technology. Maybe. So the one thing that strikes me as odd in this part of the conversation is, if we don't trust the source of the data or it goes down frequently, et cetera, why are so many companies trusting OCR? Why are so many companies trusting VOD or VOA, right? Or VOE, depending on what you call it. So you kind of can't talk out of both sides, in my opinion. You could try, and you can have backups in case systems go down. But as an example, like with Truve, which does VOE stuff, if your borrower doesn't, or your borrower's employer doesn't subscribe somehow, or it's not integrated, you can't use the technology. So, what do? Well, we still have to get a pay stub or W-2s, and that data still has to go on the 1003. Okay, well, who do we trust? Now, you might say, well, we trust the underwriter, but the underwriter's not the one that's putting the value in. Who does it? Loan officer or processor. And they put the values in the 1003. They calculate, they do whatever work they're supposed to do. And then it goes to the underwriter who re-verifies the information. Now, if you go through and we trust the underwriter's calculations of income for the purposes of DTI, for the purposes of a condition being generated for that, well, then we really shouldn't fire any auto conditions until after the underwriter's done with whatever that calculation is for income verification, things like that. So, it's a hard conundrum to deal with. And so in this particular file, if I did my job properly, but I was busy talking, my apologies. So if we come over here and verify this is an FHA loan, it is awesome. So we come over in here, and if you've seen this before, I'm sorry for boring you, but I just want to make sure everybody sees it. See this button down here? So that was 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks, 4 clicks. Now, if your team is unchecking these, you need to train them to the part where if they continue to do that, they don't really need their job. So yeah, it's a threat. And they need to leave these alone and click add selected. Why? Because if they came in here and deleted these out because they go, I don't need them anymore, the next time they underwrite the file, and every time, if you're using this, please, every time the underwriter goes in, they should click 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why you don't delete, because it should come back. Now, this is part of this conversation, is the idea of making sure an underwriter really appreciates the fact that this condition came in. We don't need it, so therefore we waive it. The idea of underwriters going through and removing conditions that they don't need, it's not their prerogative to do that. And so in the comments here, if you're watching, if you're watching the chat, you'll see Candace says they don't want to, quote, clear what they don't need. That's not their choice. So Kristen says we do not allow deleting or blocking automated conditions. They have to waive them and report conditions that do not apply. And I think Kristen's philosophy and workflow is great because that means that we have to tweak the business rules so that only the correct conditions come up. So how does this evolve? How does this go in? If you haven't had a chance to move to enhanced conditions yet, I get it, but you should work towards it. As I've said recently, you don't have to reconfigure your conditions to get to enhanced. You don't even have to create brand new condition types, although I've said that. You just need to get conditions over into enhanced sooner than later, because by doing that, what you're giving your company the ability to do is to come over here into workflow rules and fire enhanced conditions automatically two ways. The first way is to come in and do I have conditions in here? I don't. So let's go create them. You can select all kinds of triggering events. One of the things that is important to distinguish is there is a service order fulfilled option for a triggering event. I'm still a little bit iffy on that one. For me, I like field value modified because in field value modifieds, I can pick standard, custom, or even virtual. And you guessed it, one of those virtual fields is a document being received. So if I know my service provider is returning a document, I can use that as a trigger for going to the next step. The next step, of course, is building a condition editor for the entire rule. Now, last week, somebody had a question about what's the difference between conditions here and conditions in the results. So if we wanted to add in to, where am I? I totally went by it, didn't I? Apply enhanced conditions, right? And we can do that a couple different times. So in this enhanced conditions, that was Angela. So in this enhanced condition, we can do just certain conditions, or we can do the whole radio button. And this whole radio button, as some insights, this whole radio button brings you right back to the business rules, and it brings you to the automated enhanced conditions section. So this guy is your pyramid. So think about this. This is your pyramid. This is like every condition that should always fire based upon what is happening. And quite honestly, it's probably going to be the same as this. So it's not like you have to reimagine anything. You can just go through and build your pyramid here. Whether and I always recommend building it bottom up, meaning all your conditions based upon everything, and then get narrow to the point with any specifics. But because that's all we ever had, right? But now you can actually, if you want, you can build all your base conditions here. So like for all FHAs or all wholesale or all whatever. And then you can get into your specifics in your workflow rules here where there's specifics. So Luba says, so like a set. Yeah, that's like a set, Luba, 100%. And instead of worrying about your teams applying a set, or even worse, picking a set, but then only choosing certain conditions of a set, you can just come in here and make their life a heck of a lot easier and give your file a better quality opportunity. What does that mean? We all know that files change throughout the process. So when you're doing this kind of a thing and you're leveraging workflow rules to fire that base, right? That big base, you can use these workflow rules based upon multiple triggering events to always be running. And that's something that is a little bit, it's not something you always think of, like when should we run automated conditions? Their answer is always. We should always run automated conditions anytime that things are happening, whether it's a field value being modified, a milestone being completed, a document being added, whatever. Those are the kinds of things that you can go through. Something else that's a little bit unique is when a condition is added. Now you might say, but Larry, why do we have automated conditions? Like, why would you focus in on when a condition is added? Because the reality is if you've got a condition being added manually, where they're going in and adding it, there's probably a reason why that one doesn't exist in automation. Maybe you don't have the data point, or maybe it's something that is done as a workflow change. You can leverage conditions being added to cause a cascade of other conditions being added. So if your team is adding in something with condo, and you want to make sure all the other condo conditions are there, that's a good example. It'll automatically add for them. The underwriter, whoever's adding those conditions, doesn't need to remember. Luba asks a question here in chat. What if a condition is cleared, but then something that triggers that condition is updated? What happens to that condition? Is it uncleared? No, it is not uncleared. But you can actually, as a result, one of the things you can do is go ahead and update the enhanced condition tracking status. So if for some reason you had a file, and I don't know if this happens to anybody, but you had a file go to the table and it didn't close. Something changed. It's no longer closing. I've had situations where the file had to be reworked at the table. So what do you do with all those old conditions? Like, do you leave them cleared? Do you not leave them cleared? Like, what do you do? These are things that you can explore in your own workflow and figure out, but you can automatically update that. What I want to make sure you do as you're setting up these enhanced conditions, this is something some people forget. Make sure that in your enhanced condition, you go through and check this box. Conditions cannot be duplicated in a loan. This is for most conditions, probably almost all. I can't think of one where I would want it replicated. If you leave this unchecked and you do automatically apply that condition, it will replicate. So this could be an opportunity where you do want it to replicate for like a clear to close condition or something. But my experience is most of these conditions need to be checked so it cannot be duplicated. And this is the same kind of performance that you see with standard conditions with automation. They're not replicated. Here you just have a choice. All right, Candace adds, we had auto conditions on briefly, but lender, I guess that's LTC Lender Toolkit, wanted it off mostly because duplicate conditions were being created. Should have taken the time to determine what conditions can be duplicated and which ones can't. Another project for, oh yeah, that's exactly what I talked about, Candace. Thanks for bringing that up. We apparently have, I'm such a nerd. So loan transaction coordinators, I see LTC, I guess that'd be LTK. I'm just not with it. Loan transaction coordinators, nothing to do with Lender Toolkit. Sorry, Lender Toolkit. We apparently have a few they want to duplicate it, but we don't have the time to turn those off. Yeah, so you're definitely going to want to understand which ones can be duplicated and which ones can't for your enhanced conditions. So definitely something to investigate. If anybody, by the way, if anybody needs, like if you can't get these conditions out of your Encompass, I can give you the button form click code that you can put on your own custom input form to export all these conditions out into an Excel sheet. If you need that, just ask. Luba asks, what's the purpose of internal and external IDs? Is that for reporting? And enhanced conditions, you mean, right? So this is a way for you to organize your conditions. It does not go outside of Encompass, but when you go into an enhanced condition, see if I can do this quickly. So when you go into an enhanced conditions, one of the cool things about enhanced conditions is if you are managing them manually and you go to add one, you can do a search. This is not what I was trying to do. I think that was documents I was thinking of. In any event, you can see where we got the internal ID and external ID. So that is where that'll get referenced, Luba, but it's strictly just a reference for you to make sure that you've got the conditions lined up with your own organizational flow. It's not meant for anything in Encompass that I've found yet. Hopefully that's helpful. I was looking for some, I think it was document name. I think if you add document names, it does something a little bit unique. Alex asked, do I have the button click for enhanced conditions now? Sorry, Alex. It's not that I've seen. I appreciate you asking. Externals are outside facing, depending on how you put them on any external resource. So you could add the ID if you wanted, but again, when you do your approval letters or your if you're exhibiting on like a website or something like that, you don't have to present that external ID if you don't want to. So big takeaways here. Work on your standard conditions. Make sure you understand how your workflow goes. Make sure that you explore the enhanced conditions because it's still a big project for a lot of people. And make sure you start thinking about your data. You know, it's all about the data for me and getting through and leveraging all this technology, and just start picking away at the littlest parts of that process. And you don't need third-party tech to fully automate your underwriting department and your underwriting workflow. You really don't. And love to continue the conversation. If you have any comments on this, throw them in the community. Let's keep talking about it. That's all I got for today. You guys are awesome for always coming. Thank you very much. Have a great day and enjoy. And please share with us any successes you have. We'd love to hear about them. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.